folks, and welcome to the ManageEngine Insights podcast. I'm Akash Kapoor, an enterprise analyst in ManageEngine, and I'll be your host for this episode. Today, we're going to talk about the human element in cybersecurity and whether zero trust security approaches can help mitigate the risks posed by social engineering. Now, when people talk about cybersecurity, the discussion frequently centers itself on IT alone. We talk about endpoints, we talk about networks, we talk about MFA, SSO, and all this, but we forget about the most important part of an organization, which is the people. Now, as a result, social engineering attacks have been a constant throughout, and in fact, they've been on the rise recently. A recent study by Proofpoint showed that more organizations suffered that at least one successful email-based phishing attack in 2021 than in 2020. And phishing is just one method used by attackers to trick your people into doing, what they shouldn't be doing. Meanwhile, on the security side, zero trust has been gaining a lot of prominence. However, while many people talk about zero trust and expound its various benefits, they don't really know exactly what it is and what it can do. So to shed light on the what and how of social engineering and on how these attacks can play out in the context of zero trust security, we have with us Joshua Crumber, CTO of Fish Firewall. Joshua is an internationally respected cybersecurity subject matter expert, published author, and keynote speaker. And most importantly, he is a very well-accomplished ethical hacker. During his career, there's not been a single network that he and his teams have encountered that would keep them out. And more notably, he's accomplished several impressive acts of social engineering, such as talking his way into bank vaults, into Fortune 500 data centers, corporate offices, and more. So on that note, hi, Joshua, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Great to have you here. All right, so let's jump into the questions.
Absolutely.
All right. So the first part is about people. People seem to be a very overlooked part of an organization's security practices. And going by data from sources like the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report and other such industry reports that come out annually, it seems that attackers nowadays are focusing more on targeting the people in the organization than just vulnerabilities. So this has led to people often being called the weakest link in the organization's defenses. So what's your take on this?
Well, my take actually goes a little bit beyond that. I don't necessarily, in almost all organizations, people absolutely are the weakest link, but I don't think it necessarily has to remain that way. I believe, though, that at more of a higher level here, that all of cybersecurity is a human issue, not a technical issue. And across the board, it's those soft skills that we're failing at. As an industry, and technologically, we've actually come a long way. We're doing fairly well, but we still continuously across the board at almost every organization are failing to address the human element. And I think part of this is because everyone's looking for that magic box that's going to fix everything. And no matter how secure you are, your people are the group that can poke a hole in that security. The question is, how big of a hole can they poke? And I guess that depends on the person and the architecture within the organization. But it's the people that are the weakest link. And so, all these studies focus on phishing and stuff like that. And that's my focus, is stopping phish clicks. But I will say the human element goes so far beyond just people clicking on phishes or falling for social engineering. So yeah, that's how we're guaranteed to get into every network. But it's the mistakes that IT makes, like hard coding credentials or administrative credentials and PowerShell scripts that are sitting out on, open shares, or creating spreadsheets of passwords as opposed to using some sort of password vault to share credentials between IT. But things like that guarantee that once the hackers get in, that you can get full access, or that they can get full access to everything. And then, it's the blue team not staying up with the latest threats and tactics that the bad guys are using, that guarantees that they can stay in there for an average of 88, 89 days before being detected. So, it's humans are failing across the board. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It makes perfect sense. And I'm guessing by this, organizations aren't really taking this seriously, or is that a different thing in your experience?
Some organizations are taking it seriously, and I think it really there's a few key factors as to what determines whether or not organizations are taking it seriously yet. A is, have they been breached yet? Has it cost them of 7 figures to recover from an incident? There's a lot of people out there, a lot of organizations that still think, well, I've been doing it like this for the past 30 years. I've never had a problem. Why should I change things now? They're sitting on a ticking time bomb. It's not a matter of if they're going to get hit with that massive ransomware attack. It's a matter of when, because as there becomes less and less low-hanging fruit, the low-hanging fruit becomes more likely to get picked. So, for those organizations, most organizations are really motivated by that. And then we've got compliance. So people with PCI compliance requirements tend to be more likely to address the human element than just about any other organization, because PCI does put a heavy focus on security awareness training, running phishing attacks and things like that within your organization. But not enough.
All right.
Not enough.
I think that's pretty evident by all the attacks that have been going on. Even recently, I think this group Lapsus has been targeting big organizations, one after the other. And from what little I've read and what little I've seen, they seem to be kids just going on a joyride who don't really know much about what to do and keep the trails hidden, but they're hitting some pretty big names. I think Okta, and NVIDIA, all these big names have been hit by these guys. So.
Well, yeah, I did a pen test just recently where we're looking at their firewall, and it's so outdated that that my team was able to go in there and grab all of their passwords because they had a log file that was exposed through a directory traversal vulnerability on their firewall. And then we get into that log file, and all of their usernames and passwords are sitting there. And it was, they found this within just minutes of starting. So within 10 minutes, they're not only on the VPN, but they have compromised systems and accounts, and actually had domain admin credentials within 10 minutes. It took them about an hour to realize they had domain admin credentials because, a lot of enumeration and figuring out what you have. But yeah, within 10 minutes they had domain admin, and this still happens. And that fortunately was a company that hired us to come in and identify their issues. So we were able to find it before the bad guys did in that case. But so often companies aren't reaching out to people like myself or getting a phishing service or really doing anything in cybersecurity until after they have that breach.
And by then it's too late for them.
It is.
Right. So coming to social engineering, so basically this term is used to refer to attempts by bad actors or even ethical hackers like you to target the people in the organization. Now, some compare it to a confidence game. So what are your thoughts on it? How would you define social engineering, and what are your takes on the entire field?
So social engineering is offensive psychology. So it is nothing more than manipulating basic human instinct in order to get people to do things that you want them to do. We see it in our everyday lives. It's everywhere we look. The most common form of social engineering that we see is it's probably memes these days, but marketing as a whole is a form of social engineering. It's the offensive side of psychology. How do I impact somebody's decision? How do I get them when they're making that decision to choose me over somebody else? Marketers have to follow rules. When they don't, they generally get in trouble. But the bad guys don't. So while marketers are confined by truth, at least to some extent, a lot more than the bad guys, the sky's the limit. They can create any lie in the world to get you to do something, and they're very good at it. And it's not just lies, it's scenarios. So an example would be, if I want to get into your building and you've got controlled access, I need a badge that I swipe to get into the building or a key or whatever. All I have to do is show up with 2 coffees, 1 in each hand, and say, can you please hold the door while somebody else is going in? And I'd say 9 times out of 10, but it's probably more like 99 times out of 100, they're going to let me in and not even think twice about it. In fact, they'll probably hold the door for me on my way out when I have, 10 of their laptops in a box that I'm, stealing. And that is the reality. I one time I social engineered, or I guess tailgated. So I found that early on in my career that in these high security places, smokers are a weak point, because the smokers, they go hang out outside. And so you can go without having any credentials, get access to them and start talking to them. And so I had this one, it's one of the largest financial institutions in the country. And I tailgated into that place off the same guy 4 years in a row. And the cover just kept getting stronger because he didn't know he had messed up years prior. They weren't like taking the pen test report and using it for education. And so, the next year I show up and this guy says, "Hey, I remember you. You're that auditor from XYZ bank." And I'm like, yeah, that's me. Forgot to print business cards this time for that, but I don't need it. So, but to me, that is social engineering. It's manipulating human instinct, because people are wired to be nice, wired to help each other. And I know it may not seem like it, but to social engineers, they see it and they abuse it all day long.
It's like the old con game gone digital and all. I mean, you use the same techniques just to get people to do the things they're not supposed to be doing and let you into places you're not supposed to be in. Is that how you got into all the data centers?
It is. So, I mean, every story is a little bit different, but some of them I was able to just walk in like I own the place. You wear a nice suit and some loud shoes, so you'd be amazed at what you can get away with. Some of them took a lot of pretexting. So I think the most difficult one, but also one of the craziest ones, was when I got into the bank vault. And literally, was holding stacks of cash, right? And but with that one, I spent about 6 hours on the phone with a bank executive the Friday before I was able to get in there on that Monday. So that Friday prior, I was on the phone social engineering one of their executives. The pretext that we used in that case was that we were going to fix their email. And so at this point, I'm going around to each computer updating their email settings, and it took so long that it literally got me access or full access to their bank vault, because at a certain point, everyone had become so familiar with me because I'm just around their office going through with the pretext. That they go upstairs, all but one teller and one security guard go upstairs to celebrate everyone's birthdays for the month, because everyone's having cake and coffee. And when that happened, all of a sudden, no one was watching me, and the bank vault was wide open because I'm trusted now, and I was able to walk right in. They had no clue.
No, actually, after listening to the story about how you got into the bank, now people are aware of phishing and probably its cousins, smishing and wishing, when they use SMSs and voice calls to try to trick people into doing this. But going by your story, also, there seems to be a lot more than just this to social engineering. So could you take us through the various methods that could be used, to trick people into doing or sharing things that they're not supposed to? And especially if you've seen something new come up in recent times.
Oh, absolutely. So there's a number of different formats that I've seen a lot lately. I'm going to go back to memes. Memes are a form of social engineering that are incredibly effective. They're shaping this world, and most people aren't even paying any attention. So that is one, but that's not really the malicious form. That's just more like, impacting people's opinions and things like that. But on the more dangerous side of it, there's a number of interesting ones that I've seen happening a lot. Chat systems, chat windows. So when companies allow support or have a support chat or sales chat or things like that, more on the support side than sales, but criminals are abusing those systems to either feed you malware or get information about somebody in order to take over their identity. I've seen millions of dollars in cryptocurrency stolen by bad guys targeting telecoms in order to get information about somebody. So they're using this chat they're gathering a bunch of information about the person. So they'll have like 100, 200 different chat interactions with this organization about or pretending to be this one person until they get enough information that they can then call in and be that person. And so once they can call in, then they call up, they pretend to be that person, and they do the SIM swap. Once they do the SIM swap, they can log into the accounts. And so that's an area I'm seeing. Social media is also just filled with malware. Be careful what you're clicking on when you're in Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of these different social media formats, because a lot of bad guys are out there, pushing malware through that. And then another place I'm seeing it is research. So all of this like expensive paid research, there's, you can find that same research for free. And that free research has malware embedded in it. And so that's another one of those places I've seen a lot of these sort of attacks. What I found and what's most interesting is the evolution of phishing recently to actually use artificial intelligence to target you in a more intelligent way. So what it's doing is it's going out, scouring social media, it's building a company index, figuring out who reports to who, and actually sending phishes from the boss to the employee automatically. And I mean, it's early stages right now, but just with what we've been able to do with AI targeted phishing campaigns from an educational perspective at Phish Firewall, I'm telling you, it's going to get far, far worse. And that's really where I see this going is much more highly targeted social engineering attacks. So, maybe the mediums still stay the same, whether it's, SMS or text messages or email or phone calls being still the primary three mediums. But what I think that we're going to see is much more targeted, where it's the bad guys know things about you that they shouldn't know about you, and they're using that to get you to click on things. The example would be hobbies. So let's say you're an avid golfer. I see a world where the bad guys know who the avid golfers are, and we're already seeing it somewhat because all of these data breaches are being used, and the bad guys are collecting them, and it's more and more intelligence. And now all of a sudden, with all the ransomware attacks, we've funded the bad guys. So they've got tons of money to build out these massive MongoDB databases of this that give them access to, in almost real time to all of this data to be able to target you.
That's a scary vision of the future of phishing attacks. I mean, I've heard about weaponized AI and stuff, but this is the first proper example I've seen of it that you've given me. And it's frightening to say the least right now.
Absolutely.
Along these lines, are there any other interesting evolutions you've seen in the tactics that people are using, especially in the wake of the pandemic? I mean, initially I know there were some people trying to use healthcare news as a way to get people to click things, but is there anything else that's changed, like a change in the medium or other tactics that they're using?
I mean, there's tons of mediums. Honestly, I've seen snail mail. Legitimately, like sending physical letters that have a link to a malicious site before to try and get people to clone it. QR codes have been really, really big one lately for malware. So, be careful what you scan, not just what you click on. I used to say be careful what you click on, but now it's a little bit more complex than that. But yeah, QR codes, I would say, are the biggest sort of up and comer there that we need to be careful about.
And how about stuff like deepfakes now? Like if people make like a deepfake of someone, say like a few from this webinar, they take your face and make a deepfake of it, can that also be used to trick people into doing stuff? Do you see a future for that, or is that too effort intensive?
Well, I 100% see a future where that might happen, but I don't think it's anytime in the next, 2 to 3 years. I mean, maybe 4 to 5 years from now, we'll start seeing that, maybe longer. But I think that I think we're still a little ways out on deep fakes really like going mainstream, just due to the cost, the resources. It's the bad guys are looking for low-hanging fruit. So if they're rolling out deep fakes on you, first of all, this is a highly targeted attack. It's probably not about ransomware anymore. Yeah, but it like I said, the deep fakes are very, it's going to be too heavily targeted at this point. But I do think at some point, the cost of computing, the resources, things like that will get so low that, yeah, deep fakes could 100% become a commonplace in phishing.
Right. So kind of like how ransomware went from being just a one-off thing to now people have like ransomware as a service, I believe, right? Where they just buy a ransomware kit from someone and then they deploy it.
Oh, not just ransomware as a service. I mean, they have headhunters recruiting IT people that can plug in malware. And if they like successfully ransom your company, they'll pay you $1 million.
I think I read about this with this Lapsus group as well, right? They were looking for people to help them get into to various companies.
Yeah.
Interesting and scary.
Very scary. Because like, I mean, you think you trust your employees, but then you got to ask, do I trust them to $1 million worth? No, I mean, I definitely do with mine, but I know that the bigger the organization, the more of a threat that becomes. And yeah, it's a scary world.
And the bigger the organization, the more the payout these guys can get either through ransomware or through the data breach.
Yep. And they're already in your financials. By the time you get the ransom, they know exactly how much you can afford to pay.
All right, thanks for sharing that. It's just been interesting and scary. Now let's come to the biggest buzzword of the last couple of years, at least for people working in IT and IT security, zero trust. So now the idea of perimeterless security or a zero trust model is not quite a new one. It's been around for a while. I think the Jericho Forum in 2004 talked about perimeterless, and then Forrester coined the term zero trust back in 2010. And I'm going by Google Trends out here, but it's recently only like in the last 3-4 years has the interest in zero trust really picked up. And now everyone's talking about it. Some going so far as to claim that it's the be all end all to their cybersecurity problems, and it can stop everything, including social engineering. And a lot of it might feel like hyperbole, or some people might be skeptical about it. So as a person with experience in cybersecurity and an interest in social engineering and the like, I'd like to ask you, like, can a zero trust network defense model help organizations defend against social engineering attacks? And if so, to what extent?
So the answer is yes, ish, yes-ish. So, I mean, anything you do is going to help defend or help mitigate attacks. I'm a massive advocate of zero trust. I've been advocating for zero trust so long that the buzzword is actually annoying to me these days because it took so long to get anyone to actually pay attention. But so zero trust is great. So your user clicks on something, they get their system exposed to malware. If we've effectively deployed zero trust, that user is only going to have access to the data they need to do their job. They're only going to have access to the systems they need to do their job. And so the data and systems impact from a lateral movement standpoint or perspective is very much mitigated. But it is still key as to which users are falling for these attacks. So it does lower the risk. It does mitigate some of a lot, not just some, but a lot of the risk. But at the end of the day, what if your top IT, like your true IT nerd that keeps all your systems running? What if that person's credentials get popped? What if the CFO's credentials get popped? And that's where the zero trust model is not quite as effective at dealing with social engineering. And that's why I think zero trust alone doesn't necessarily deal with it, but it is a absolute necessary layer because it helps mitigate your attacks. What we want, and what I've always focused on as a security professional is, if I'm going to go in and make security suggestions for your network, they're going to be around just a few things. They're going to be around either, hardening to prevent people from getting in the first place. But you can only do so much there. And, to a lot of people's point, the perimeter is sort of dead because they are going to get in if they want to. So now we have to assume that some bad guys are still going to get in our network. So we focused on the perimeter, but now we got to focus internally on how do we limit lateral movement and how do we limit the access or access to data and things like that. And that is least privilege across the board. The only caveat I want to say is the flip side of least privilege is privilege creep. And we got to make sure that doesn't happen too. Because even if you start out with least privilege, if you're not constantly monitoring and evaluating and readjusting, you're going to have somebody that gets promoted again and again and again and again. And we're not removing the privileges they had when they had that previous job before we give them new privileges for the new job. And that always is, again, one of the concerns. You can start out with least privilege, but you got to make sure you're continuously enforcing it.
If you don't, then you're actually kind of subverting the entire goal you set up with.
Absolutely, especially with some of your people that move around. So pen test accounts with these big companies that have giant red teams, those pen testers accounts have access to so many systems in that organization. It's insane. And these are our security people in the organizations, but every other week, they're moving on to a different application and testing a different application. And 9 times out of 10, we're not revoking those credentials. So,
So the security team might become the reason why your security gets breached.
Yeah. Well, it's one of my pet peeves in our industry. We don't drink our own Kool-Aid quite enough.
It helps a lot of people in a lot of industries, but yeah.
Yeah.
So coming back to what you defined, you said if you have an effective zero trust implementation, then it will help mitigate the attacks to some extent. So I would like to know first off, what would you define as an effective implementation or a mature implementation? And secondly, going for how you would break into a organization that has implemented what you would call an effective zero trust security model. I'm assuming one thing would be going for the top guys, like you said, like the IT admins or the CTOs, but is there any other thing you would use to try to get into them or support their defenses? So,
I mean, when it comes to targeting with a company that has really good zero trust, it's going to be a lot more targeted attacks, finding those people that would have that level of access. So as opposed to sending a fish because I don't care where I get in, any foothold is just as good as the next. That's not true in a company that has really good zero trust. So your average employee, I'm probably going to get access to very little information and systems. And so what would I even have to ransom if I'm a bad guy, right? So at that point, it's going to be much, much more targeted, and they're going to go after your IT people, your network people. They're going to go after your finance people, your human resources people. Like those are going to be your top most targeted departments, that and senior management as well.
All right. So basically it's what they call whale fishing, right? Going for the big guys, not just everyone, or spear fishing.
Yeah. And that's one of the things with security is that it's all layers, and any one layer in and of itself is not going to be effective. There is no magic bullet or silver bullet, if you will, and there's no magic box that you can just plug in to fix this problem. And so with each one, it'll have issues and it will have exceptions. So the exceptions on a good least privilege is that, well, we have people that have to have access to a ton of stuff in our corporation. And that's where, that sort of thing breaks down. But those people, if we're doing things right, are more educated or have more like security awareness training and things like that to make sure that they're not going to fall for those attacks. Because we should be, before we, it's like when we train kids or teenagers to drive, we don't just hand them keys and say, good luck. We make them go through training to learn how to drive. And we should be doing the same thing in our organizations with our employees. Make them go through training before we just give them the keys to the kingdom and say, good luck. I hope you don't wreck. and frankly, a lot of companies are still just handing the teenager the keys and saying, good luck, I hope you don't wreck. But it needs to be, I know I focus on the human side, but that's how we address those sort of limitations in the zero trust architecture.
That makes sense, also focusing on the human element. I mean, because at the end of the day, no matter how good your solution is, if people don't know how to, follow the policies and procedures laid down, it's not going to work. Yeah. So do you have any advice basically for IT admins or CXOs, and other stakeholders for implementing zero trust in the organization, apart from what we've already discussed, where you're talking about least privilege and enough awareness? So is there something else you'd like them to focus on, or is this good enough as a base?
I mean, I think in terms of least privileges, the biggest thing is just don't across the board, make sure that you are limiting access, and don't just do it for your new employees. Like, go to your developers. Your developers are probably your worst offenders at least privilege. Developers, I mean, if there's any on the listening to this podcast, I'm sorry, but I've seen it even with my own, where they go to build a database user, for example, or an API user, and they don't know specifically what permissions they need yet for that user. So they just give that user all permissions, like make it basically a super user. And that's an issue. So when you're doing zero trust, don't forget about the soft element too, and that is the education and the training of your developers, because they can break that whole system down too. And in zero trust, don't forget about external storage solutions, USB drives. If you've got them enabled and you have people that are able to plug in USB drives to back up, I don't know, let's say the QuickBooks or whatever financial reporting system you have, that's a big deal if somebody just walks out and it's unencrypted. So, control those USB ports so that you know what can be plugged in. And if you are going to allow people to do that, I've got, like in my organization, I do let people plug in USBs, specifically self-encrypting USB thumb drives. And that's it. That's the only thing they're allowed to plug in. So they have to type a code into the USB drive. It decrypts it. They plug it in. They can write data to it, and then they can, unplug it, and it automatically encrypts. And so, there are ways to do it safely, but be aware of it, because there's a good chance that USB drive gets lost.
And in
so,
this
and
case,
also,
sorry.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, and also from a social engineering perspective, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten in by just dropping. I've got these cool USB drives. In fact, I wish I had one. No, okay. I don't have one in like right here. I'd show it to you. But I had custom USB drives printed that just say confidential on one side and sensitive information on the other side in big, bold red letters. And so I'll put malware on these things and just drop them or throw them around, and people will plug them in, and now I'm on their computer. I especially like the HR department. They will plug these things in real quickly, especially if I put something like, 2022 executive compensation plan, or, or 2022 employee layoff schedule. Things like that. And they open them and they run them. And, if they didn't have the ability to plug that in, if we had done least privilege and the configuration on our systems, and not just with, some other elements like least privilege on what I have access to on the network, least privilege in, what my computer can connect to on the network, least privilege in terms of things like that. That's great, but you got to hit every element, or least privilege doesn't really do much.
A single rule could basically sink the entire ship.
Yep.
All right, I think that covers the next question also, but I was going to ask you, how to mitigate social engineering attacks during, before, and after implementing zero trust. But I think this pretty much covers it. Or do you have something to add to that as well?
Oh, well, no, I have a lot to add to that. So this is where I say zero trust is not enough. We've got to educate our employees. I believe that with social engineering being our greatest threat, that the answer is just staring us right in the face, and the industry can't seem to figure it out. So if social engineering is the biggest threat, social engineering is also the answer. That's how we fix the problem. So what I believe in is what I call social engineering for defense. If our people can be manipulated into doing things that expose our organizations to risk, our people can be manipulated into doing things that make our companies more secure. So here's the example I give. Let's say that you are very likely to click on security themed phishing attacks. What if we found that out? And we begin sort of like Pavlov, conditioning you to not click on those anymore. So now, instead of just giving you one, I know what you're going to click on. So I beat up on you and endlessly until you stop clicking on those, and literally creating muscle memory or a subconscious reaction to those types of attacks. Now, when you get it from the bad guy, you're not going to click. You're going to move on, and you're not even going to think about it, because it's a subconscious sort of look both ways before you cross the street type reaction. So what we've got to do as an industry is focus on the subconscious more than the conscious. Everyone is doing that traditional classic memorization training when it comes to security awareness, and we're failing for a number of reasons. For starters, we put our company's worst communicators in charge of our biggest communication issue, and then we wonder why we fail. So your cybersecurity people should not be communicating topics like phishing attacks. So what do your users need to hear? Well, they need to hear think before you click. But what are your information security people going to tell them? They're going to give them a laundry list of 25 different things that they need to look for inside of emails. They're probably going to tell them to go look at the email headers, get really technical. Yeah. And the average user now, they're lost. We've got to simplify things and stop making tech so intimidating, I guess, to the lay audience that doesn't understand cybersecurity. Because Hollywood makes it portrays it as if it's something that is so complicated that most people, only a genius can understand it. That's how Hollywood makes it look. And so if we want our people to not be intimidated by cyber and to take it seriously, we've got to make it less intimidating. And that means simplified education that is continuous and entertaining. And here's the trick about entertaining. When I make something, or if I were to educate you and you actually laugh because you're entertained, that creates an emotional response. That emotional response actually triggers a chemical reaction inside your brain. And that chemical reaction helps you to retain that knowledge for a longer period of time. So simply by creating that emotional engagement, we increase the likelihood of people actually hearing what we're telling them about cybersecurity. So yeah, I mean, we've got to do a lot more phishing, and we've got to get a lot smarter about how we're approaching the issue if we want to be successful. But yeah, it all boils down to social engineering as a form of defense.
Coming to the first thing you said about beating down on people repeatedly, for a small org that might be possible, for an enterprise that's going to be a little hard to target everyone like that. But yeah, I like the other part about making it interesting and entertaining, so people actually laugh while they are learning, and that kind of helps them retain it. Because I've seen the thing you described, right? When I was searching about phishing and stuff, I saw an article about how to identify a phishing email. Again, it went through all the steps: check the header, check the spelling of the domain, and that's all great for someone who's really, really into the domain and searching for this. But for my grandma, for example, if she's opening an email, or my colleague who's just joined the thing and is a fresher from college, and has no idea about cybersec, if they open it, they're not going to know all this stuff. And they read this article, they're just going to be so scared, like, what's happening. So it's a great point.
100%. Yeah. And by the way, in an enterprise, scalability is not an issue. To me, the biggest area that AI can help us in cybersecurity is around doing the repetitive tasks that are easily programmable. And so where does AI help us? It's also a really hot topic lately, almost as hot as zero trust. How can AI help in cybersecurity? And the reality is in a lot of areas. So we have too much noise. We have too much to do and not enough resources to do it. So to me, AI is there to help lower or I guess be a force multiplier for the cybersecurity team within the organization. So the AI helps to lower the amount of noise, and the AI goes and processes all the things that are easy. And then when it can't handle it and it says, oh, I'm not smart enough for this, it passes it off to a human. That to me is where the biggest value AI can have in an organization is. And so, I'm not trying to promote, but like we've already built an AI that can do that within an organization. And I know we're not even the only one. So
it's basically like what we were discussing about attackers using AI to make more targeted emails, use the same thing just to make, as you said, using social engineering to combat social engineering.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so I think that's almost at the end. So, but before we go, just wanted to know, like, what are your thoughts about the future of zero trust and social engineering attacks in the evolving web? Like one example I can think of is what Microsoft called ice phishing, which took place on a Web 3.0 decentralized finance platform. So, do you have any thoughts about this? I know we briefly touched upon this earlier, but if there's anything else you want to add about this in particular.
So the future of zero trust, I really think that we're going to see a lot more artificial intelligence helping us manage it. But doing things like looking at your access logs. So, and having it, trigger an alert that goes up to somebody and say, okay, Akash hasn't accessed this resource in the last 6 months. Does he actually need access? And then that, it goes to an organizational chart, throws it out to you or your boss, and your boss says no, and it's done. Just like that access is revoked because it hasn't been used. So I see a lot more of artificial intelligence helping us to make sure that things like privilege creep and stuff like that aren't as big of an issue as they are currently. And that's on the zero trust side of things. I think we're going to see zero trust creep into just about everything we do. So zero trust, we're already seeing it a little bit, but we're going to see over the next 12 months applications of zero trust we haven't even thought of before. I'm sure. And then I think the other side of it is social engineering. It's on the exact same course. It's going to get far more complex. And we're going to see a lot more AI in the coming years. And so I think these social engineering attacks, we're going to see a lot more of the ones that aren't just send you a fish and be done. We're going to see the very complex ones where somebody might work with one of your people for months on end to get them to do something and really establish that rapport and that relationship. And then once we get there, honestly, there's very little that can be done to prevent that because that is a whole different level. But I do think we're going to see a lot of that AI. We're going to see more and more of the data that's being breached daily being used to attack us and to target us more. And so, yeah, we've seen it some. I know when that Ashley Madison leak happened, there was all kinds of social engineering attacks around all of the users of that to get them. So we've seen it, but I think we're only just, beginning to scratch the surface, and that's the tip of the iceberg.
So AI is both the problem and the solution to some extent.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just like social engineering. Most of the things that are the problem can also be the solution too.
All right. I think with that, we've come to the end of this session. Thank you so much for your time, Joshua. You've shared a lot of useful insights, and I'm sure our listeners would have appreciated it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thanks everyone for tuning in. If you have any feedback or questions, please leave them in the comment section and we'll get back to you at the earliest. And stay tuned for our next session.